With Yanagi soon to arrive alongside Alice, there are questions that really need answering. Is she worth pulling? What are her best teams? And more importantly, should you prioritize Yanagi, Alice, Miyabi, or one of the new characters teased like Orpheus and Seed? Thankfully, that's exactly what we're diving into in today's video. We'll be covering everything you need to know about Yanagi, from her full kit breakdown, her optimal builds, team synergies, and how her playstyle and combos actually work in practice. Before we get into it though, if you caught my previous video on who to pull in version 2.1, I apologize, as I originally planned on covering Yanagi's own personal value in this updated guide. Worry not though, as I'll be addressing anything and everything that I talked about from that video in this one. As a final note, some of the footage from today's video will be from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change. But as always, if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Before we go any further though, a word from today's sponsor, Bootdev, a platform that I've talked about recently, but I've also been using myself. To be transparent, I wasn't really sure how much I'd like or be able to get back into coding, as honestly, coding has always felt overwhelming for me, especially after having taken a break for so many years not having done it. But Bootdev quickly proved themselves to be one of the few platforms that actually have several ways to get you back into it and also keep you up to pace. The catered development path, especially in languages like Python and Go, are built around actually doing things and not just theory. And this means that you're writing real code and building projects from the very start with no endless reading, hypothesis, or just some dry lecture. To add to this, in terms of using Bootdev, the site looks quite clean, the learning pace is very enjoyable, and honestly, there isn't much fluff. The best part of all, however, is that there are some lessons that are based around video games, and again, this makes the concepts more intuitive, especially if you're a gamer or someone that enjoys learning through that medium. Now, what really sets it apart though is the paid version's interactive layer. There's live code challenges, progress tracking, and Boots, their AI wizard bear who uses the Socratic method to teach without hand-holding. You can also earn EXP, complete quests, battle bosses, and climb a leaderboard. And with all this, if you enjoy gamified learning, this hits the mark. To add to all this, all the course content is free to read in guest mode, and there's a 30-day refund policy if you ever change your mind. So if you've been thinking about learning backend development in a smarter, more practical way, definitely check out Bootdev, and huge thanks again to them for sponsoring today's video. At her core, Yanagi is a fast-paced, stance-switching Anomaly DPS who thrives on chaining combos and applying her own unique disorder effect. In terms of play, she has two stances though, Jogen and Kagen. With these, you'll constantly swap between the two to stack their buffs and speed up her attacks. Jogen focuses on boosting her electric damage and providing her with anti-interrupt, while Kagen increases her pen and increases her interrupt level on her basic attacks. The trick to mastering her though is maintaining both stance buffs at once by frequently swapping mid-combo, giving you a steady boost to every attack. Now, her defining mechanic, Polarity Disorder, however, really affects the way that she approaches combat. With her EX special or ultimate, she can trigger a mini disorder on demand, even without mixing elements, letting her deliver high bursts when needed. That said, the goal is still to build your anomaly gauge to around 70 to 80%, wait for an applied anomaly like shock or burn, then swap back to Yanagi and use an EX special for a guaranteed disorder chain. Between each EX special though, you'll loop basics, swap stances for both buffs, and just generally apply more anomaly. Now let's get into Yanagi's kit. Yanagi's core passive significantly boosts her team's anomaly potential, and after she activates her EX special, triggered by her squad, gains a 250% increase to its damage multiplier for the next 15 seconds. Additionally, if her EX special successfully hits an enemy, she gains a 20% increase to electric damage dealt to that target for the same duration. Long story short, you'll ideally pair Yanagi with any other electric or anomaly agent in general, as her core passive directly buffs and benefits from doing so. Regarding her additional ability, Yanagi can first activate this if she's paired with an anomaly or electric agent, but once active, each time she switches stances and lands a hit with her basic, her electric anomaly buildup rate is increased by 45% for 8 seconds. Next, Yanagi's basic attack chain consists of up to 5 slashes, but before we go further, we need to explain her unique mechanic revolving around 2 different stances, which determines both the type of damage and the added bonuses gained. In Jogen's stance, she gains increased electric damage and higher anti-interrupt strength, while Kagen grants her a boost to her pen ratio and interrupt level on set attacks. After switching stances, she then retains the previous stance's bonus for 8 seconds, and this means that timing the swap is important to maximize her potential buffs. Each stance also comes with unique damage and days multipliers across her combo, which makes stance management that much more important overall too. Now, returning to her basic attacks, her combo in Jogen's stance is noticeably shorter and quicker in animation, but interestingly, though Kagen does feel slightly clunkier and longer in animation, it does feel safer to use at times as Yanagi sits in the air for longer. Moving on to her her special attack related abilities though, her EX special is a charged dash followed by a powerful downward strike that deals electric damage and switches her stance. More importantly though, this will trigger her Shinra Bansho state, and this lets her rapidly cycle through combos by skipping directly to the third hit. Additionally, if the final part of Yanagi's EX special lands on a target affected by an attribute anomaly already, it activates a unique disorder that deals extra damage based on her anomaly proficiency, plus a portion of the original disorder effect's damage. In short, this makes the ability one of the highest damage dealing skills in Yanagi's kit and is essentially what you'll use most of the time when playing her. Interestingly, however, Yanagi's normal special attack is also worth using at times, as this instantly allows her to swap stances at any time regardless of how much energy you have. Yanagi's dodge though is pretty standard and doesn't have many special features. However, if you perform a dodge counter, Yanagi can immediately transition into the third hit of her current stance's basic attack combo, which does help when trying to minimize the low impact attacks that she has in her kit. Yanagi's assists aren't too unique though, nor is there anything really special about them either, but similar to her dodge, if you activate a defensive assist, you can start your next attack from Yanagi's third basic attack, and you do also technically swap stances here, which is worth noting in case you end up on the wrong one. Yanagi's chain attack delivers a wide electric slash that automatically switches her stance and also allows an immediate follow-up from the third hit of her basic attack combo, but at a higher level, the chain attack from Yanagi will be used to control which stance you exit in, setting up the correct buffs for when Yanagi is sent back on field. Yanagi's ultimate takes things a step further by unleashing a massive area slash followed by a lightning strike, and if the strike hits a target under the effects of an attribute anomaly, it triggers the same powerful bonus effect as her EX special, dealing additional damage based on her anomaly proficiency. After the ultimate casts, however, she can also follow this with the third hit of her basic combo, similar again to all the other abilities in her kit. Now, in terms of skill priority, the goal here should be to max her core passive, followed by her special attack, basic, then ultimate, and finally her assist and dodge are the last two abilities to prioritize, though again, she is an anomaly agent, so do with this what you will. For players aiming to fully optimize Yanagi's performance, spending more time in Jogen stance generally provides a slight advantage over Kagen stance in terms of overall damage output. However, the true priority isn't just favoring one stance, it's maintaining both stance buffs active at all times, as having both bonuses up is far more impactful than simply sticking to one stance for longer. In theory though, you really only need to make sure you're maintaining your stance bonuses as previously mentioned, but to add to this, using basic attack skips is also very helpful to minimize wasted time, and with this, here's the full list of basic attack skips present in Yanagi's kit. This includes her dodge counter, chain attack, ultimate, special attack, EX special attack, quick assist, and assist follow-up, and if this sounds like you can use a basic skip after every skill in her kit, well, you'd be right because it basically is every ability that she has access to. Now, in terms of combos, however, the first most generic skip combo includes using any of the abilities that I just mentioned, but in this case, for example, dodge counter followed by basic attack 3, basic attack 4, and basic attack 5. Now again, as a reminder, you can swap out dodge counter here with literally any other basic attack skip, but for the second generic combo, we need to talk a bit about Yanagi's special attack. Now, as previously mentioned, unlike most characters, Yanagi's standard special attack is far more than just a filler skill, it's a core part of her gameplay. Using it not only lets her instantly swap stances at any time, but if it's activated after either the third, fourth, or fifth hit of her basic attack combo, it allows for a faster stance swap, lets her continue the combo seamlessly in the new stance, and even grants a small animation speed boost. This interaction opens up a loop that can effectively let you chain attacks endlessly while maintaining both stance buffs, and this looks like the following: basic attack 3-4-5, special attack Ruten, basic attack 3-4-5 and the new stance, special attack Ruten again, and then repeat the cycle depending on which stance you prefer. However, in terms of actual play, the general gameplay goal and combo will look like the following. First, avoid overcapping any anomaly with Yanagi's EX special or ultimates when possible, and second, maintain her buffs as consistently as possible by using either her EX special, special attack, or whatever ability best suits the situation. With these goals in mind though, the following loop is standard and usable in most cases, though of course the exact stance that you start and end on can vary. Chain attack, basic 3-4-5, EX special attack, basic 3-4-5, ultimate, basic 3-4-5, EX special, 3-4-5, and of course, swap between these stances as you prefer if your goal is to end in one stance like Jogen, following one ability or another. Now, when it comes to W engines though, Time Weaver is Yanagi's clear best in slot option. This W engine provides a 30% increase to electric anomaly buildup rate, allowing agents to stack anomaly much faster. On top of this, whenever her special or EX special attacks hit enemies already suffering from an attribute anomaly, she gains plus 75 anomaly proficiency for 15 seconds. Finally, if her total anomaly proficiency reaches 375 or higher, her disorder damage is boosted by 25%, giving her an even more massive stat boost overall. For players without her signature, Electro Lip Gloss is the next best choice, and as long as there are enemies inflicted with an attribute anomaly, which Yanagi can maintain almost permanently, this W engine grants a 10% attack increase and also makes her deal 15% increased damage to affected targets. That said, this does still perform anywhere between 9 and 14% worse than Time Weaver for Yanagi, making it a strong, accessible alternative. Now, as a reminder, however, this W engine does also require multiple battle passes and effectively months to obtain, so consider this before choosing this option for your Yanagi. Now, another decent option is Fusion Compiler, which does synergize pretty well with Yanagi's frequent stance swapping gameplay, but since she naturally uses special and EX special attacks often, this W engine's passive remains pretty much active or maintained throughout most encounters. However, this does end up performing roughly 8% below her signature in terms of performance, making it a step down compared to the signature, and also technically more expensive than something like Electro Lip Gloss. Meanwhile, Weeping Gemini and Rainforest Gourmet fall into the budget category, and while both are more accessible for free-to-play players, they do end up being around 12 to 16% less damage than Time Weaver. Now, as a final note, though it does end up performing worse than a rank 5 Electro Lip Gloss, Weeping Gemini is generally the go-to for free-to-play choices on Anomaly agents, and as a result, I'd recommend using this if you don't have any S-rank alternative. Now, in regards to whether her signature is worth pulling for, it is worth noting that this W engine formerly had a bug where its electric anomaly buildup rate actually affected all attributes instead of its original intended purpose. And because this was left in the game for months, it was actually a decent W engine option for essentially any character who can make use of the stats or appreciate the disorder value that it provided. However, since this W engine's passive has been fixed in more recent patches, the more general value it had before is now much lower. Regardless of this fix, however, the W engine is still impactful for most Anomaly agents, as the anomaly proficiency and disorder damage increases are huge DPS buffs. When it comes to drive discs though, Yanagi's best in slot setup is 4-piece Chaos Jazz paired with 2-piece Freedom Blues. Chaos Jazz is perfect for her because it not only provides plus 30 anomaly proficiency, but its 4-piece bonus significantly boosts her overall damage output. With this, when Yanagi is off field, it increases the damage of EX special attacks / assist attacks by 20%, and once she swaps back in later, the buff lingers for 5 seconds, giving her stronger swap onto field combos. This of course pairs perfectly with how Yanagi plays, as most do swap in and out of combat with her depending on the team. Freedom Blues 30 anomaly proficiency is always appreciated given the free stat, but Thunder Metal can also work depending on the substats of the discs used. For main stats, you'll want to prioritize anomaly proficiency on slot 4, electric damage bonus on slot 5, and attack percent on anomaly mastery 6, but the actual choice of which main stat to use here is once again mostly dependent on the substat roles of each disc drive. That said, some choices like her 5th slot or 6th slot main stat will also be influenced by the characters you choose pair with her. If running an electric only team composition, for instance, attack percent will see greater value given how much electric anomaly buildup is already on the team. Now let's talk about Yanagi's Mindscapes. Starting off with her first Mindscape, Yanagi gains both an offensive and technically defensive edge too. Once this Mindscape is active though, whenever an ally applies an anomaly to an enemy, Yanagi gains 1 stack of clarity for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Each new stack refreshes the duration, and if Yanagi takes damage while holding any stacks, 1 stack is consumed to make her immune to that damage for 1 second. Additionally, while at least one of her stack is active, her anomaly proficiency increases by 80, giving her a noticeable boost to her DPS. Overall though, the invulnerability plus anomaly increase actually ends up accounting for a roughly 80 to 20% damage increase. On the topic of her first Mindscape, however, you may also be curious about whether her W engine or first Mindscape is better value, and to this end, although her W engine has technically been fixed / adjusted / nerfed, or whatever you prefer to label it, it is still a decent general option for most Anomaly agents. As a result, I would actually suggest pulling for Yanagi's W engine over getting a second copy of Yanagi to activate her first Mindscape. Her Rapid Thrust deals 20% more electric anomaly buildup, and by holding the special attack input after the charge connects, she can then spend another 10 energy to perform an additional thrust. If her energy is too low, or if the button is released though, she'll follow this up with her normal downward strike as usual. When this final strike triggers polarity disorder though, its damage multiplier increases to 20% of the base value, with each charge adding 15% to the multiplier. Long story short, this translates to around a 10% additional damage increase on top of her M1, but it is worth noting that this value can be difficult to express accurately, as sometimes this extra energy will be wasted or better used later on in a fight. And as a result, proper usage of this Mindscape will obviously provide higher value as opposed to what's been noted here. Next up is her fourth Mindscape, where where Yanagi gains added team utility. With this, when she applies an anomaly, enemies are inflicted with expose for 15 seconds, increasing the pen ratio of enemies that attack them by 16%. Now this not only enhances Yanagi's own DPS, but also buffs other allies' pen scaling too. As a result, this upgrade offers about a 13% overall damage boost to the team's total damage, but honestly, as with most agents' 4th Mindscapes, this is okay but not insane. Finally, looking at our 6th Mindscape, this is where Yanagi's kit fully comes online. After performing a dash with her EX special, her Shinra Bansho state is then extended to 30 seconds, greatly increasing the duration of her high damage window. During this time, her EX special damage increases by 20%, and she can now perform up to 4 dashes in a row to enhance her polarity disorder. These 4 extra thrusts also only cost half the usual energy, letting her output significantly more damage with far less resource drain. Now with this upgrade though, Yanagi gains roughly a 53% damage increase, making M6 her most impactful power spike, but as it was previously mentioned in her 2nd Mindscape, the practical value of this Mindscape will be influenced heavily by her team and when she's using said energy to perform multiple charges. It's been over 240 days since Yanagi's release, and with newer agents like Yuzuha, Alice, and even upcoming characters like Seed and Orpheus being teased, there's plenty to discuss regarding Yanagi's current potential team options and best partners. Now because of her additional ability and just the way that her kit functions as a whole, Yanagi performs best alongside top tier Anomaly agents. That means lineups like Yanagi Alice Yuzuha and Yanagi Miyabi Yuzuha stood out the most, achieving clear speeds of around 45 seconds while also performing exceptionally well in Deadly Assault with scores near or well over 40,000. That said, while Yanagi pairs best with meta Anomaly characters like Miyabi or Alice, other options such as Piper, Jane, and Bernice still also found success with her too. However, testing showed that these alternatives delivered slower clear speeds and much lower Deadly Assault scores, making them noticeably less efficient by around 20 to 40% depending on the team. Lastly, Yanagi Vivian Yuzuha is another viable option worth mentioning, and this team had a clear speed of about 15% slower than the Alice or Miyabi variants, but it compensated with a 17% higher Deadly Assault score compared to the Alice version, though it still fell about 5% short of the Miyabi team's score. Overall, Yanagi clearly performed well when paired with Anomaly agents, but certain teammates, especially when limited, pushed her to higher results. With this, while there are clear best in slot partners, most Anomaly focused lineups with Yanagi are still strong enough to deliver results, and that included lineups like Yanagi Seth Rina, Yanagi Vivian Rina, Yanagi Bernice Rina, or anything in between. Now let's move to how Yanagi performed when paired with electric type characters like Soldier Zero Ambi, Trigger, and Chingyi. Overall, these teams tended to have pretty subpar clear times compared to our usual Anomaly based lineups, but the best performing setup in this category was actually Yanagi Trigger Yuzuha, which did reasonably well, but even then, this still didn't match the speed or efficiency of her top Anomaly teams. That said, that isn't to say that these electric focused lineups weren't able to clear at the same rate as some of the other teams at times. It just meant that on average, and especially if you weren't fighting against electric specific enemies, they were definitely more fallback options as opposed to optimal choices. Now let's wrap things up by comparing Yanagi to the other upcoming or current options on Banner. While it's obvious that Miyabi remains the standout pick among all current choices from what we know, it's still worth considering every option from a more Yanagi based perspective. As a quick disclaimer before we go further though, each agent will naturally shine in fights tailored to their strengths, so their value will certainly vary depending on the encounter, but it is worth considering the pros and cons of each DPS, even if they end up with a higher score in one fight. Miyabi remains the most consistent and impactful character available right now, and while this is partly due to the uncertainty surrounding Seed and Orpheus's final kits, it's safe to say that replacing Miyabi with the DPS that's both easier to play and more effective is off the table for now. Of the characters we already know though, comparing Miyabi's value to Alice or Yanagi is pretty simple. Each performs well against bosses weak to their respective elements, but Miyabi has proven to not just be decent, but exceptionally strong even when in neutral matchups. However, when we shift focus to unreleased characters like Orpheus and Seed, the picture becomes much less clear and your choice becomes much more difficult. Based on current information, Yanagi doesn't overlap with Orpheus unless Orpheus's kit revolves around Anomaly and Disorder, which still remains speculative. Seed on the other hand though, may have potential overlap with Yanagi depending on how her kit functions. While Seed has been announced to be an attack agent, some bosses are simply just weak to the electric attribute, meaning both Seed and Yanagi could technically fill the role of fighting that boss. For now though, there is not enough detail to judge Yanagi versus Seed accurately. What is clear though is that Miyabi remains the top pick, Alice generally follows in value, Orpheus doesn't seem to compete directly with Yanagi, and Yanagi's competition with Seed will entirely depend on Seed's final design and mechanics. Finally though, let's talk about whether you should pull for Yanagi on her rerun banner. For her pros, she has a lot of W engine variety to choose from, which means she doesn't necessarily need her W engine. She can also trigger disorder on demand without anomaly buildup. Yanagi can also be played as either a main field DPS or even off field DPS slightly if you prefer to. And finally, she boosts anomaly damage while also handling electric weak enemies with ease. As for her cons, she is very combo heavy and you do need to track stances, buffs, etc. And in most cases, if you want to do any of her high damage combos and stances, you do still have to be on field at some point in time, regardless of how off field you choose her to be. To add to this, the visual effect to notify you of which stance she's in is pretty small / at the top left of your screen, or it's a small colored indicator on the back. With all this said, deciding whether to pull for Yanagi ultimately comes down to your playstyle preferences. If you enjoyed a high skill character with a rewarding damage payoff, Yanagi is definitely worth pulling. However, she isn't for everyone. Yanagi can sometimes require a decent amount of time on field and demands decent stance management, buff tracking, and combo execution if you want the high damage that she has in her kit. If you enjoy playing high skill characters though with a rewarding damage payoff, Yanagi is absolutely worth pulling for. However, if you prefer a more straightforward or off-field style, it might be better for you to hold on to your resources for the future banners and figure out what these characters actually do. That's going to be it for today's video though, guys. Thanks again for watching. As always, I'll see you all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.